Again, say it's so great to be able to be here with you this morning, to be able to study God's Word. It's truly a great honor for us. I was thinking about that through the week, how great it is. I know I don't say it enough, what y'all mean to me and Brittany and the boys. Y'all mean so much that y'all have taken us in, and it's so great to be able to be here this morning, to be able to worship God with you together. Let me begin this morning by asking a question. Have you ever suffered because you did something right? All right, so let's kind of examine that for a moment. It might be that you can recall a time that you were in school and you had not studied for a test, and you knew that your friend was sitting beside you, and perhaps you could look over his shoulder and kind of look at the answers, and you thought, well, I don't know anything what's happening on this test. I'll just simply cheat, and that'll get me a little bit better grade, and I'll do better the next time. But it might be that we say, well, I know cheating's wrong, and that wouldn't be very honorable of me to do that. So you suffered a bad grade because you hadn't studied right, and instead of cheating, you decided to just take the punishment. It might be that you say, well, I was knocked down from a promotion at work one time because in my career I would not lie for an individual. I would not lie for my boss. I stood for the truth. I was not going to be willing to go on and lie and cover up some things. And because that I was willing to stand for the truth, I had to suffer for that. It might be that you suffered saying, well, I didn't get a raise, or perhaps even getting fired. But perhaps you are here this morning and you say, well, I've had to suffer through something like that. It might be that we have had to leave friends, and unfortunately sometimes even family. That we've had to suffer through those things because we said, I can't be around you anymore because the lifestyle that you're living does not align with what God commands. And because of that, I've had to break ties, and I've had to break ties with friends. And unfortunately, some of us even breaking ties with family members simply because they weren't doing the right thing, and we said we cannot go along with this. So we have to suffer some things through that. You know, we find ourselves, again, when I say suffering, the idea of maybe sacrificing or doing without, right? Instead of going on and being rewarded by something, we say, well, I'd rather do without something and do what's right than to enjoy that and it be a sin in my life. It might be that we deprive ourselves because of our morals. It might be that you're here this morning and you say, well, you know, there's certain things in my life, certain morals that I stand for, understanding that we are here in the buckle of the Bible Belt here in West Tennessee, and understanding that many of us have good Christian morals, and we know men and women like that have good Christian morals, and perhaps they don't even go into a church building, but they are quote-unquote religious. They have morals that they will not go against, and from that they suffer some of those things. They would rather suffer and stand on their principles. But as I'm speaking to you this morning, right, if you're here this morning and you're a child of God, we say, well, as a Christian being, I can suffer certain things in my life because I know that heaven is my home. Matthew chapter 6 and verse 20, that I am to be laying up treasures for myself in heaven. That I realize that as this morning that there are certain things that I can do without, right? That I'll sacrifice because I know one day I have a home prepared for me in heaven that will exceed anything that is here on this earth. So I'm happy to go. I say, well, you know, you're not going to be able to get this job if you won't do these certain things. And we say, well, it doesn't matter. I'll go on and do something else. Because ultimately, what? This world isn't my home. I've got another, right? A natural disaster comes and fire, or like I said, a tornado, natural disaster takes away our home. And then we say, well, you know, this isn't really, I'm just here for a little while. I've got a home prepared in heaven. So you see the mindset of the Christian, we can say, well, I can go through certain things here on this life. I can suffer through certain things because I know I have a home in heaven one day. 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 13 tells us that I'm not to be afraid of who might harm me, right? Because as we talked about as we've been studying 1 Peter, that they can destroy my body, they can destroy my family, they can destroy my home, they can destroy everything that I have here on this earth, but they can't destroy my soul. So if I'm here and I'm a Christian and say, I want to go to heaven, guess what? You can make it, right? As long as we're making the right steps, the necessary steps. But if you are desiring in your heart, I want to go to heaven, I do not want to be lost in the devil's hell, I want to go there, you can make up your mind and you can go there, and nobody can steal that from you. So what we have to understand, again, we got to be faithful. Revelation 2:10. Faithful unto death, I'll get that victory crown. And many of us, right, have gone through, if we had the time, we could go through this auditorium for individuals who have had to suffer through things, had to go through certain things in this life because of righteousness' sake. They said, all right, I'm willing to suffer. I'm willing to deprive myself. I'm willing to sacrifice certain things, certain activities, or certain relationships because I know I want to go to heaven. So here's the question again, let's ask this morning. Why would you suffer and sin? The title being a miserable religion for an individual that would suffer here on this earth for certain things because they know they want to go to heaven, yet they would be willing to sin as well. And in a sense, as my uncle would tell me, you're spinning your wheels. So we're going to kind of go through that this morning and look at this idea. And I hope that if you're here this morning, we'll realize that as we're going to build through this argument, that if you're here and you're not a child of God and you have principles and you have morals and you say, well, I'm trying to be a quote-unquote what we would call a good person, but you haven't obeyed the gospel, you're spinning your wheels. If you're here and you're a Christian and there still seems to be sin in your life that you just can't get rid of, we have to understand that it's going to knock us out of heaven and you're just spinning your wheels, right? You have a very miserable religion. So let's kind of go through this and ask these questions and kind of do this. I hope this makes sense. I told Danny I was excited to get to teach this lesson this morning, so I hope it's beneficial to you. So why do you suffer? All right, so we're here. We said, all right, I've sacrificed things. I've undergone certain things, ridicule, laughing, things like that, right? We understand the idea of suffering. We've had to suffer through certain things in this life. We say, well, some of it is because of my principles, right? There are certain things that I just will not do. We have integrity. We say, my integrity will not allow me to do that. I'm reminded of my grandfather. As I was preparing this lesson, he farmed a little bit there in Savannah and Hardin County, Tennessee, and I was about Carson's age, I guess, and I would go and spend the summers with them, and the man taught me quite a bit, and he talked about how he was growing some beans, and he didn't think they were going to turn out very good, and he promised a man a price for that crop, and it turned out to be a better crop. And he said, I had to sell him, take and lose money on that because my integrity, I had told the man, you can have it for this price. He said, they turned out better than what I thought, but I still had to stand on my integrity. So he taught me that, right? And I appreciate those lessons that he taught me as I was growing up. So we say, we're here this morning, and you say, well, I suffer because of my integrity, right? If I tell a man I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. If I tell them I will show up somewhere, I will show up. So I may have to suffer through certain things in this life because simply of my integrity. It might be that we say, well, it's because of tradition. Again, the same grandfather, he worked cattle. He did more cattle and hay than he did row cropping. But nonetheless, because of his tradition, he had to get cows up with a horse and a dog, and that's what I thought I had to have. And Brittany can tell you I suffered a lot through the principle of tradition because that's what I thought I had to do. It wasn't the most convenient way or most economic way to do it, but that's how I thought I had to do it. Many of us today, right, we'll stand on those traditions, right? We'll say, well, I'll do this or I'll do that simply because my family did these things, right? It's tradition. I'll suffer through certain things because it's tradition. Might be out of spite as well, right? That kind of hit me hard. Sometimes I've done it. I've had to suffer through things out of spite because someone has told me that I couldn't do it or I didn't need to be doing it or something like that or I would never make it. And I was going to show them and be determined that I could do it and I was going to get through it and I had to suffer quite a bit because of spite. So it might be that we're here this morning and we say, well, I suffer, Ben, right? I sacrifice. I do without. I'm doing those things because of my principles. But it might be because it's of your lusts. Well, what about that? It might be that we're here this morning and we have to suffer the consequences of our actions. Boys, Brittany and I have tried to explain to the boys, right, the consequences of their actions, whether it be bad or good, that if they're making bad decisions, they'll have to like Brittany's granny used to say, you make your bed, you have to sleep in it. I said, boys, if you're going to make these decisions, you have to suffer the consequences of your actions. And it might be that we're here this morning, or we may know individuals who say, well, I'm having to suffer, right? I'm having to sacrifice and do without because of the decisions that I made chasing after my lusts or my desires. You know, and sometimes we say, I just can't give them up. And I can't give up that sin in my life, and because of that, I continue to suffer through this life because of those things. Now again, why are we suffering? Perhaps, and hopefully, we find ourselves, if we've ever had to suffer in this life, maybe it's because we're doing God's will. 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 17, it is better to suffer for well-doing than for evil-doing. That if I've got to lay my head down at night, and if I'm going to have to suffer and sacrifice and go without and face ridicule, at least I can lay down knowing what? I've done the right thing. At least I can lay down tonight and say, I did what God commanded me to do. Right? And it's better than to, as we read in Peter there, as we'll get into the sharpening the sword, it's better than if we say, well, I've robbed a bank because I had to have some money and now I'm out on the run and right to going through that life. No, it's better to just suffer because we did the right thing. It's always right to do the right thing, and it's always wrong to do the wrong thing. And that's what Brittany and I are trying to teach our boys as well. Why do you suffer? Right? It's my principles, Ben. Traditions, my integrity, the spitefulness right about me. Maybe I suffer because I've got sin in my life. I've got things going on and I'm having to face these consequences. I'm suffering because I'm doing what God commands me to do. Whatever it may be this morning, what we all find ourselves suffering through something. Now, let's kind of examine it through this lens here. Sometimes we're happy to suffer, kind of as we spoke about in the introduction. All right? Religious people are going to suffer. Again, that's not a really good advertisement for being a Christian in some sense. We have many churches today that'll go through and say, look, if you'll follow, if you'll follow God and give him over into your heart, right, or however they phrase that, and they'll say, look, you're going to be prosperous. You're going to have a lot of money. You're going to be blessed with health. You're going to be blessed with all this financial gain and the job that you've always wanted, and be able to have all this stuff if you'll just give your heart over to God. But what we find is the gospel isn't a message about that. The message of the gospel is you're lost and you're dying and you're going to hell, and God's giving you an opportunity to get out of that, and that is by following the gospel plan of salvation, that Jesus Christ died for your sins, and that you are willing to follow that, to sacrifice your old self, to put your old self to death and be raised out of that water of baptism, be a new creature, and you live a totally different life. That's exactly what the gospel is teaching you, that you won't follow after those things of the world. But they say, I don't want to hear that, Ben, right? I don't want to hear that if I'm a Christian, I'm going to have to suffer persecution. Well, that's the long and short of it. That if we're Christians, if we're being righteous, you know it just as I do. You've experienced it. You will suffer some type of, and I say persecution, right? Some type of suffering, sacrifice, ridicule, something because you are right. You're trying to be righteous. Now think about this. Again, am I happy to go through my suffering? I hope that you are. As a Christian, you say, well, I know that righteous people suffer. I know that people go through these things. I think about the apostles. Think of all what the apostles had to go through. Following Jesus, giving up their livelihood, quitting their jobs, as we would say today, right? Going and following after Jesus. And through that, right, they were happy to do that because they knew what was expected, what was going to happen to them, right, if they were faithful. But imagine, again, as we look at this, what if Peter or John or, some of those men, if they did all of that and then, like we think about Judas, right, going out hanging himself, all of that suffering, all of that he went on through his life, only to miss heaven. So see, the apostles suffered and they were happy. Acts chapter 5 and verse 41, they were happy to suffer for Jesus' sake. They said, you know what, how great it is, right? If we say, oh, well, they're going to be persecuted because we're doing the right thing. It's great, right? Why? Because I know Jesus was persecuted. I know the apostles were persecuted. I know Christians are persecuted. So I'm in good company as far as that goes when we think of it like that. We say, well, Ben, why don't you just do what you want to do, right? Why would you suffer? Why would you be happy to deprive yourself from certain things? Why would you be happy to sacrifice certain relationships? Why would you find it being happy to be fired from a job because you wouldn't do something? Why don't you just live your life the way you want to live it? Because I know there's coming a judgment. As we continue reading, appreciate Warren reading that for us this morning. If you look in verse 5 there of 1 Peter chapter 4, it talks that these people they don't understand why we don't run to excess of rioting to live like the world. And it says that they're going to have to stand before the judgment. So I'm here this morning and I said, well, I'm not going to live my life just the way I want to live it because I know I'm going to have to stand before the judgment bar one day. 2 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 10, for we all shall stand before the judgment seat of Christ, have to give an answer for the things done in this body, whether they be good or bad. So if we're here this morning and so I can't again, sow my wild oats and go on and just live my life like there's no tomorrow, because there is a tomorrow. And I'm going to have to give an account for all of these things. So I'm trying to make sure that I'm doing exactly what God commands me to do. I can't just live my life. I'm happy to suffer because, again, as Paul said there in 2 Corinthians 5 in verse 10, I'll give an answer for the good things that I did as well. If you're here and you say, I'm going to obey the gospel, right? Those are the good things that we'll have to give an account for. Every time we choose to do right over wrong, we give an account for that. And this is what we say as Christians, that's what we're looking for. We say, this world isn't my home. I'm just here for a little while. As we tell the boys, 100 years from now, what's really going to matter? And when we kind of change our mindset to that, we think, well, I don't mind to suffer a little bit here on this earth. I don't mind to sacrifice a little bit because I know that heaven's going to be a lot longer than any time here on this earth. To think of eternity is hard for my simple Tennessee brain to get around. I had it described one time that imagine a marble or a rock the size of the earth, right? Nothing else, no water, nothing like that. Just a rock the size of the earth. And if an ant was able to do it, if he walked all the way around the equator of the earth, by the time that ant wore down, right, worn a path, and he cut the earth in half, we wouldn't even really be getting started in eternity. That's hard for me to comprehend. Everything's bound by time, right? School's starting back Monday. Everything's going on. I know what I have to get ready to do by next Sunday. So the idea for time to essentially stop and be eternity, it's hard for my brain to wrap around that. That it's that amount of time, right? And then that's not even the beginning of it. We say, wow, eternity. Now again, eternity in heaven or an eternity in torments and in hell. I'm happy to suffer. I'm happy to suffer through certain things because I know what heaven's going to be like. We're talking about investing in our spiritual future. Please come out and hear these men. They're good speakers, a lot better than I am. And you'll listen about what we need to be doing to invest in our spiritual future so we can say, I want to go to heaven, right, where there's no more dying, no more crying, no more death, and then our loved ones aren't, being left or dying and things like that. We say, I want no more suffering, right? I want to go to heaven. I want to be in that place, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes here to go there. So, are you happy to suffer? Now, here's kind of what we're getting at with this lesson. We do suffer sometimes in this life, and again, we have to understand why we're going through the suffering, why we're having to sacrifice, why we're doing without, why we're willing, again, why we are willing to say, I'm not going to do this because of this. And I'm happy to suffer as a Christian because I know that if I'm doing everything the way God commands me to do, I can go to heaven. And it's going to be a lot better than anything that I could have here. So why do you sin? Now, let's think about this. Let's slow down and think about this part of the lesson. This is what Peter's teaching us here in 1 Peter chapter 4, when, as Warren read for us, for he that hath suffered in the flesh hath ceased from sin, and that he no longer should live the rest of his life in the flesh, time in the flesh to the lust of men, but to the will of God. If you're here and you lean on that idea that I'm going to be able to go to heaven, that I can suffer through anything because Christ suffered, I'm a Christian, I'll make it to heaven, why would you continue to sin? Because as we made the point in the introduction, you're really shooting yourself in the foot. All right, what do I mean by that? If I am willing to suffer, then I should not sin. Again, that's what we're following after. I'm not following after the lust of men. Because the world's, I can't live for the world and live for Jesus. And what we find is so many people will come in on Sunday morning, they'll dress up, and they'll come to church services just like they're supposed to, and they'll have this false sense of confidence that, oh, well, I'm checking that box, I'm a Christian, I'm going to follow that, right? I'm going to do that. And Monday morning, they go back and they live just like the world. And they'll go back and live like the world till Saturday evening, and then Sunday morning, guess what it is? It's time to go back to services. You're shooting yourself in the foot. You say, I'm not going to make it to heaven if I've got sin in my life. If I'm living for the world, you're not going to make it. And if you're saying, well, I'm going to suffer through some things as a Christian because I know heaven's my home, well, no, it's not, because you've got sin in your life. So what we find is if you're living like the world, you can't be serving two masters, as we'll see. So the idea is I can't continue to live like the world if I'm a Christian. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. That I would be willing to suffer, right? I would be willing to sacrifice, do without, stand on those principles of righteousness, but still miss heaven because I'm sinning in my life. Now, what about that? Notice this. Here's where we're at. Sin separates us from God. If you have your Bibles, if you're in 1 Peter, just lick your finger, turn a few pages over to 1 John. 1 John chapter 1, notice again what we're looking at, that God is light. Verse 5, this then is the message which we have heard of him and declare unto you, that God is light and in him is no darkness at all. I can't fellowship the world and be in darkness. Notice verse 6, if we say that we have fellowship with him and walk in darkness, we lie and do not the truth. I can't live for the world Monday through Saturday and then say I'm walking in the light here on Sunday morning. That's not the way it works, friends. We find ourselves that we are not living for God. There is no darkness in him. So I can't have fellowship with God if I have sin in my life. Isaiah 59, 1 through 2. Right? It's my sins and my iniquities that what separates me from God. He's willing for me to come to him, but as we made the point in sharpening the sword last week, that through Jesus I can come before the Father. It's only through Jesus, through his washing of my blood, or the washing of his blood, washing away my sins, that I'm able to be in a relationship with God, because the water of baptism has washed me of that. I've contacted the blood of Christ, and because of that I'm clean, and I can go and approach God. But if I have sin in my life, I can't approach God. We find individuals day by day going through that, right? They're willing to suffer. They're willing to stand on those principles. I'm a moral person, lying, cheating, stealing, right? Committing adultery, all that stuff. That's wrong. You shouldn't do that stuff. But then they'll sin in other areas, and they're just shooting themselves in the foot. Notice, what I'm talking about when I say, why do we sin? I'm not talking about a stumbling into sin. If you continue reading 1 John chapter 1 and verse 7, that we're walking in the light as he is in the light. That idea brings with it Brother Guy N. Wood's illustration. It was like a car with windshield wiper blades on, that the blood continued, right? It wipes that sin away from me, right? It's a continual wiping of that sin as long as I'm trying to do what God commands me to do. I like Brother Steve Higginbotham's point a little bit better, in a sense, that if it's snowing on the ground, I think I've used this illustration out here, and if I tell Charlie to follow me and walk in my footsteps, and he's trying his dead level best to step into my tracks in that snow, right? Then that's what we say, well, he's trying. He's really trying hard. Now, does he get outside of my foot? Maybe. But he's ultimately trying to step in my footsteps. Now, if I tell Carson to do the same thing, right? Don't mess up the snow. Mama wants to see it out there. Follow my footsteps. But he's seen some tracks from some animal, and he goes off in the other direction. We say, well, he's not really trying to walk in your footsteps, is he? That's what we need to be examining ourselves with this morning. We say, there's a difference between stumbling and sinning. My grandfather used to say, if you think of grace like an airplane, if you stumble and fall in the aisle of an airplane, you're all right. If you fall outside the airplane, obviously that's another scenario. So we say, all right, if I'm trying to do what God commands me to do, I'm trying to do righteousness, do I stumble and fall? Yes, I pick myself back up and I keep going. But what we're talking about is 2 Peter chapter 2, verses 20 through 22, how that I obeyed the gospel and I'm living as a Christian, and then I'm seemingly just going back off into the world. I'm not trying to stop it. I know that it's wrong, and I just continue to live my life like that. Again, in the context of that, that's where we find that the dog returning to the vomit and the hog returning to the mire. With the idea there that we've been washed clean of all this stuff, but we're willing to go back into sin and again lose heaven simply because we just can't give up a sin that is in our life. We have to understand, if you're willing to suffer, if you're here this morning, you say, I'm willing to suffer, I'm willing to go through those things, but why would you continue to live in sin? Why would you suffer through this life, right? We say, I'm standing on my morals. I'm standing on my principles. I'm standing on the good things I've heard good people say, and I'm going to stand on that, but they still miss heaven. Ephesians chapter 2, 8 and 9. We're not going to get to heaven by our good deeds. We're not going to get before the bar and God say, you know what, you are a good guy, Ben. I know you didn't really live your life exactly the way I told you to, but you ultimately were a good guy. Come on in. It's not the way it's going to work. Matthew chapter 7, looking there 20 and following, that many will say to me that day, Lord, Lord, have we... I've got it mixed up. Let me look at it. Matthew chapter 7. Sorry about that. Thought I could quote it. Matthew chapter 7, looking there, verse 21, not everyone that saith unto me, Lord, Lord, shall enter into the kingdom of heaven, but he that doeth the will of my Father which is in heaven. Now, that's what I need to do. I'm not going to be able to just say, Lord, Lord, and enter in. I've got to do the will of the Father. And what we find are individuals who are willing to do some of the will of the Father, right, based on their tradition, their integrity, their growing, their morals being raised up, but they're not willing to do everything God commands them to do. What a life to suffer through, right? And we say, well, I can't just live my life, right, how I want to do it, what makes me feel good, because I know there's going to be a judgment, right? We're all God-fearing people in that sense. We're all like that. We say, I know there's a God. I know there's a heaven and a hell. Why would you suffer through this life and deprive yourself, sacrifice certain things, go through certain things, face ridicule, and then end up missing heaven as well? What we have to realize, friends, this morning, if you're here this morning, I know there's good people. I know there's good people here, and I know there's good people listening to this online, and what we find is they're good, moral people, but yet they won't follow the gospel plan of salvation. What a shame to reach that bar on the day of judgment and be a good person and suffer through things, right? Don't cheat nobody. We're going to lie to nobody. We're not going to do any of those bad things that we think about, but ultimately miss heaven because I haven't done what God commands me to do. And even more sad to think of an individual this morning that would be a Christian that had those blessings found in Christ, Ephesians chapter 1, verses 3 and following, that we have all of that heaven waiting for us and by being a Christian, and we try to do it, right? And we're saying, well, I'll do this and do that. But then we've got a sin in our life that we just can't shake. You're spinning your wheels. You're shooting yourself in the foot. Because we say, well, I'm going to miss heaven because there's sin in my life. But I'm trying to be a Christian as well, right? We can't straddle the fence. We've got to make sure we make our mind up. If you're here, and that's what Peter's teaching us here, as we're going to get into here in just a moment. If you've had to suffer in the flesh, you shouldn't be sinning anymore. Because if we're going to, we might as well live our life in a sense. Now, don't take that, all right? If you take anything from this lesson this morning, I'm not telling you to go out and live for the world, right? You'll be lost and condemned to go to a devil's hell just the same as anybody else. But what we find is that in your mind, if you're a good person, right, you're a Christian, you need to make sure that you are doing what God commands you to do. That way we don't miss heaven because we just simply won't refuse to stop sinning. So friends, this morning be mindful of that, right? Here's the gospel plan of salvation. Say, I want to do everything the Bible commands me to do. You can't get around these verses. We see what we need to do in order to be a child of God, and we can go to heaven, right? We can suffer persecution and harm and suffer all of those things. We realize that if you haven't done this, right, as good a person as you are, suffering for whatever reason, you're not going to make it to heaven. But what we find is if you're a Christian this morning and you have followed this gospel plan of salvation, but there's sin in your life, you're spinning your wheels still because you're still not going to make it to heaven. So if you're here this morning and you're subject to the Lord's invitation, we ask that you come forward now as we stand and as we sing.